G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a little chat about my 50 BMG 416 project or rifle and combination and what we've been doing here. I recently touched base. I've made some upgrades on where we're at, so I wanted to go through that briefly and explain. There's a little bit of me learning and I want to share and I want to pass that on. For those that don't know, it's a Dolphin Rifle company chassis that I've done a little bit of work down the back to, made it a little bit heavier, a little bit, put a big bag rod on that sort of stuff, but make it all shoot a bit nicer for what I wanted. It runs, this is actually a true flight barrel. This is the 50 BMG barrel, and I also have a 416 barrel. The 50 BMG is the 33 inches, the 416 is 36 inches. But those are both stainless steel barrels with one of my custom muzzle brakes on it. Custom angle back, all sorts of special design features, blah, blah, blah. But other than that, Barnard action, Barnard trigger, Night Force scope. I run a couple of different scopes on there, but both Night Force attackers. This is an air attack base, which lets me run so I get the full elevation. That lets me run a 60 MO rail, custom rail on there that lets me run with just a zero base on it, lets me run full adjustment on the scope, so 120 minutes of elevation on scope. Then I have this air attack base that lets me run out to a decent distance with the 416, moderate distance with the 50 BMG, quite a bit of difference between them. And then I also run the air attack, I also run the Charlie Chirac system, which you'll have seen in some of the videos and some of the video footage I put up on the Frontier for going extreme long range with either one of those, or probably ultra long range you'd call it. No bolt in here at the moment, not planning on shooting it, so I just haven't got the bolt there. But listen, that's the whole thing. What's different about this rifle is this bit up the front here, the Bipod system. Been through various different evolutions with it, and now I've got to this place, and I'll explain that a little bit. What's different about it is it runs a couple of bearing blocks and a rail. So if you watch it, it has a sliding mechanism there that lets the rifle slide, or lets the bipod slide backwards and forwards, or in other words, the bipod sits still and the rifle slides backwards and forwards. Now initially I did this design in its first levels, was back over here, and I had a very rigid bipod on here, and that's why I did it. I got a bipod that was heavy enough to deal with it, but I didn't want the bipod feet to skid, as they normally would in a tactical BMG sort of thing, especially in a bolt action rifle rather than the semi-auto type thing, which absorbs a fair bit of the recoil. So I had a rigid one in here, and I still wanted this movement to be able to go backwards and forwards across your rear bag. Down the back here, by the way, that's my adjustable bag base. I do various versions of it. This has got a big bag in it. It lets me adjust onto target with a couple of nods to do that side of things. An important feature for the extreme precision that we're after at ultra long range. So I had a rigid bipod at the front here, and I didn't want it to skid, so I made a bearing block system to be able to do that. Mounted underneath here originally, and that started to work quite well. Once I got all the kinks out of it, started to work quite nicely, and it was working well. But recently I decided to try something else, and that was to put on what I actually sell. I make this little bearing block here on a rail with a little attachment that can take either a Picatinny rail or an Arca rail attachment as a little kit that I can run on things. And I thought I'll try it on this rifle and see what it works like. And I'm using this Atlas 5H bipod, pretty big heavy bipod, nice big broad spread to it. I thought I'd give it a shot. And I found I liked it. It gave me an extra feature which I am accustomed to and I feel is quite valuable in controlling recoil and basically making the rifle behave better during the shot. And that is being able to get the right amount, not too much, but the right amount of preload on the bipod, which lets me absorb more of the percussion, or more of the, I shouldn't say percussion, more of the shock by attaching me reasonably heavily through it when it goes bang. So my collarbone's pressed up against the back of the stock, and I can absorb quite a bit of that, which I feel helps the rifle shoot. There's other bits involved with that, but that's how I do it. And what this bipod gave me the choice of was by being able to preload that little bit of rock that I wasn't getting the other one, that little bit of rock where you can see the bipod actually bending forward. That bit there at the beginning of the shot, I felt, and I did a test with the 50 at 600 yards, shot very well, and to me it felt like it was more controllable. I liked the way the rifle felt. There's a little more consistent feeling. I was a little more attached than the stiff leg bipod, doing the same thing and I'm able to pressure it, but I'm not getting that spring of the bipod. My logic to that is that, like I said, I'm able to just preload that tiny bit, not so much more pressure, but there's a little bit more actual load during the first bit of the bang, because it's actually got a little tiny bit of spring in those legs as well. And I suppose without getting too complicated there, I think there's a level of not only it transferring to me, but also because it makes the feet ground a little heavier. There's a little bit of everything going on that actually helps with that process. To me anyway, it felt better. It also let me use a product that I sell people and test that as well. So it was good on that sort of score. And that's what I really designed it for, was shooting heavy things in this sort of format. But it worked really nice. I was really happy with it. We only got a couple of attempts or a couple of shots with, one with the 416 and one with the 50 out at the 3,800 yards, which is sort of my proving ground. And it certainly went well. I found a couple of things which were relevant with it. One was that with the preload side of things, I got some more consistency in the elevation, but I still found there's a bit of learning, bit of practice, bit of settling for me to do, getting everything grounded better, because the more consistent I feel I am here, in the way of my preload and how far forward I'm pushing all the rest of it, the more consistent my elevation is. And then it's very subtle, but there is things where I could really see in some places I was getting more elevation in the shot. I wasn't getting more elevation or more speed in my muzzle velocity, and I was getting more elevation in the shot. And a couple of times I noticed, wait a minute, I felt that was a little different the way that shot, and it was really about how I was preloading things. So I've got little things in place. I've actually put a little mark on the other side down here to be able to see where I'm preloading to, and be able to try and make that more consistent, and I believe that's going to help. But another thing I noticed, when I looked at the video, and probably for the keen eye, you might have seen it in those videos, and I'll run those videos again down here so you can see a little bit. But I noticed with, especially the 50, but also with the 416, with the 50 we were running just under a 500 grain projectile. Sorry, with the 416. With the 50 we run even bigger fellas in the 800 grain projectiles. Now in the 50 it's running a 1 in 15 twist, so it's not a super high twist. It's right on the minimum you could run for that bullet, but it still works consistently. But there's a lot of torque going on. That bullet is getting up to 2,600 feet per second. It's only 1 in 15 twist, but it's an 800 grain bullet, so there's a lot of twist. So to start off with, when the first couple of shots, when I set up with this with the 50, and I know I had to tension everything up here, because during the shot was actually twisting inside here. An advantage that I'd got with my other system, making it all rigid, I didn't have any of those issues. When I first started here, I had to lock this up tighter to make sure it didn't twist. But then I still noticed there was some twist. So I did some thinking about that, and I came up with, this is what I'm going to run. These are some custom made feet, which I have basically got myself some more Atlas 5H feet. I've pulled them apart, pulled the rubber off them, and then made this solid bit of aluminium, which actually there's a bolt that comes right through it, steel at the bottom, but these are the new feet it's going to have. The reason for that is when I analysed these feet here, I noticed there's a moderate amount of, they're pretty squishy, which means they grip quite well in soft ground, that sort of stuff. They're sort of the texture of the rubber, the consistency of friction coefficient is quite grippy on things, but part of what they're doing there is they're actually got a little bit of squish to them. And that means in a high torque situation, in a high load situation, there's a little bit of movement going on. And I prefer they're not to be moved. I prefer the bottom of the bipod to work like a ball joint. So it's rigid, it's got no movement. It lets it rock backwards and forwards a little bit, but otherwise it's grounded to the dirt. So there's a nice feature which I use in my other big stuff, is to be able to push some pointy bits into the dirt a little bit, and then it rocks from that place. We've obviously only got a little bit of rock, if I can do that. There's only a little bit of rock going on. Largely the rifle is cycling on the bearing on the top there, but that little bit to actually get them so they're gripping, pushing properly to the dirt, helping transfer some of that shock that's coming through the whole chassis and everything to the ground a little more thoroughly as well, but also stopping it from that twist. Well, there's two things going on with these feet. you notice they're quite long. The other bit of the logic there is when they're in the bipod, well, there's two things I've done. These make the legs a little bit longer in the way from their grip point. The reason I've done that is you'll notice the bit that's obvious to the people who are paying attention and other people who don't know it, don't realise, is that I've changed the position of this. I actually had the rail underneath and then the bipod below that. So it ended up with, although it was locking up, it ended up with the centre of gravity point from that rotation point or from the feet and all the rest of it, the centre of gravity is higher. I want to lower my centre of gravity, so I want to get this further into the width of the legs. So I got myself a new piece of rail that is longer. I put it inside the chassis, probably also increasing the weight a little bit, probably a little bit of nice there, not much to talk about in a rifle that weighs sort of 40 kilos. Sorry, what does it weigh? 20 kilos, so just over 40 pounds. But what it did do is it lowered the whole assembly, this whole piece here. It lowered the rifle. It lowered the rifle by the best part, just over an inch. So that made my legs a little bit wider. There's another feature I'm doing also. This is not a bipod I want to be able to reach from the front. I set it all up and I do my adjustments down the back, so I'm not trying to reach my front. So the further out I get it, especially in something big like this, the further away basically my chassis becomes longer, so my stability becomes better, so my control becomes better over my platform. So I've actually also, by doing this, pushed the whole bipod forward another 6 inches or thereabouts. Still fits nicely, it spreads out the whole rifle. It's no little fella by any means, it's a great big monstrous long thing. A little bit longer with the 416 barrel on, this is just the 50 barrel. But to me, that's starting to come in a fair bit of balance. That's actually sitting in pretty nicely. I haven't shot it like this. I'm really looking forward to. I think between these feet, which are solid, because the legs are coming from a wider place, they're going to be going out a little bit wider. That is probably going to be right on the level of controlling that little bit of torque we're seeing. So that'll stop the torque. By grounding a little better, by the preload that I'm getting out of that bipod, being able to twist that forward a little bit, that's going to give me that little bit better absorbing of the shock and give it a little more control. And combined with it's me practicing and me learning, me getting used to things, that sort of stuff, but also a little indication mark on here, I can actually make sure I'm preloading to exactly the same place. And I should stress on that, preload isn't something, you don't try and bend the legs or go really hard against things. It's not building up pressure to try and fight the recoil. It's just trying to make things very consistent, and it's a little pressure. It changes different chassis, different things, but it's a little light pressure to moderate pressure to actually get to try and absorb that as much of the shock, but also make it cycle properly. I always talk about, if you've got a bit of free play like this, you want to go to this front piece so that when it fires it goes to back. So you end up with a fairly straight trajectory over the top of the arc there, of the barrel, I should say, not trajectory, but movement of the barrel. You see some people who are preloading really heavily and going right forward, and it might feel good to shoot, but what you're actually doing is it's all upward arc, which means you get a little bit of muzzle rise through doing that side of things, which inherently can then make it, you've got to be even more consistent to end up in the right place. As I always say, if it works fine, what you're doing works really well, you're doing quarter and better groups, leave it alone, you're doing it perfectly. If you're looking for things, that can be one of the places you're looking for. But ultimately, with those bits and pieces, that change there, this change here, that whole thing, I think this season's done. Actually, I don't think we're getting out to finish off our test results on that sort of stuff. But between the bullets and how that's working, the 416, how that's working, the chassis, how it's working, all that is really good. All this stuff is really good. And I think my final tweaks up the front here, I think I might have taken it to where, listen, it's going to struggle to outshoot a 6mm at 500 yards without any questions. But in the way of making a 50 or a 416 shoot very, very accurately, I think we're well on the road to it. Anyway, we'll see. We're learning all the time. I just wanted to pass that little piece on for those people who are interested. And as I find in most things learnt in the pushing the boundaries, even in things like this. This is, you know, a top fuel car talking about on the drag strip side of things. They still can be relevant when it comes back to just running your street class, because although there are huge differences, there are also the sames. Anyway, that's about what I can tell you. If you like the video, like, subscribe, share. If you can support us, there's links over the place. I've been through that stuff before. We're very welcome of any support and that sort of stuff, and we really would like to bring as much information to you guys as we can. And other than that, yeah, thanks for checking in on us. We'll catch you next time.